Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson, joined as always by Brian Gottlieb, and we have not one, but two series of previews to go over. Both Jumpstart, Historic Horizons, and WotC did a little video on Innistrad Midnight Hunt today, so we have some of those cards as well.
Don't even have time to complain about anything this week, Jerry. We just have to talk about nothing but Magic cards. We are trapped. They have done it successfully.
I could make time.
No, that's not make time. They have my undivided attention. There's too many Magic cards, and I have to consider them all. And wow, I already did it. I already did the thing where I leak information ahead of time.
Okay, so we'll do Midnight Hunt first, but I think we should get something out of the way before that, which is, we talked a lot last week about the potential predatory nature of Historic Horizons, right?
Yes, we did.
And the rest of the set got previewed. The front end of it was very much like, you know, these splashy brand new cards and like, look at all these bangers from the Modern Horizons sets. And here's this big shakeup to Historic after you've already invested a bunch in the decks in that format. And now maybe all your wild cards just got incinerated, whatever. And it's honestly not that bad.
Nope, it's not. I think I will straight up apologize. I mean, I was off base. I thought they were going to go a lot harder. And I don't think you can blame me for thinking that, like, given what we saw previewed and how many cards there were in the set, it certainly seemed like we were just going to get absolutely buried in Horizons cards. But that's not really the case. There's certainly a lot of playable cards. A lot of them are at common and uncommon, which is great news for anyone trying to preserve wild cards. And then we did something new for this go around. We actually made a list of the most craftable rares and mythics in the set.
Well, and you did.
I did. Yeah, I made you agree with it. I kind of struggled to hit 10, which is not what I thought was going to happen given how powerful stuff was when we got out the gates. But I think this is going to be a completely reasonable set on your wallet. I was wrong. I apologize.
Yeah, I apologize too. Although, you know, I don't feel bad about making those claims because it came out like hot and heavy, right? And there were definitely some bangers in the back end, but like you mentioned, it was common, uncommon stuff. Dragon Rage's Channeler, Unholy Heat, and they weren't upshifted, which was awesome.
Yep.
So, you know, that's rad. I don't think that I'm going to go broke on this set, which is nice. I mean, if I wanted to try everything, then it would be almost as bad as like a normal standard release. But I think I just have to cool it on Historic in that regard. I don't think that I'm going to be able to test everything for content purposes. You know,
one of the good things about the format getting more and more pushed is that things are going to get squeezed out, right? Like you don't have to try the squirrel deck. It's okay, Jerry. You can let that one pass, and I think you're going to be okay, and you didn't miss the next broken thing in Historic. So
right, there's just stuff like the Mystics Mastery nonsense where it's like, this looks really powerful. How good is it? Someone has to try it. I did. I wrote an article about it. Like, obviously, I got paid for that, business expense, whatever. But, you know, it definitely does add up over time, right? Even if it's a business expense. So it just means that that's like $100 less that I'm getting paid for that article potentially. So
very true. Very true. You got to think about that. But to your point about how hard they came out of the gates, I remember making a complaint recently. It might have been as recent as Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, the D&D set, where we were just like, wow, the start of this preview season did nothing.
Yeah.
And it was super weak. They kind of came out firing for Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Like they went hard on day one. There's some real Magic cards here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess we'll shift gears back to the first topic then. So there's only 7 cards that they showed us. But rather than just be like, okay, here's one of the mechanics, here's another one of the mechanics, they're just like, oh, here are some staples, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's a definite shift in how they've approached new sets as of late. I think it's very, I'm going to regret saying this. Doesn't it feel competitive focused? Like these are the competitively pushed cards, I think.
Yeah. So it's odd to me that, you know, Midnight Hunt, Arlen Court is on the splash art and everything, and there's just like no werewolves.
Yeah, you would have thought that's what day one is all about.
Yeah, and instead they're just like, no, like here are Like, these are the cards that I would expect to show up like midway through preview season, and then it would be like, oh, I get like, this upgraded removal spell that should then change how I'm building a bunch of my decks.
Yep.
And then it just meant that like my content was kind of invalidated. But now we have kind of like, we're starting with the building blocks, which is excellent as a content creator.
Very pleased about this shift for sure.
So yeah, it definitely does cater to us. It is weird because it's different, but I'm here for it.
Right there with you.
So like I said, 7 cards. There is a card called Triskadekaphile. Do you want to actually talk about this or no?
This card could have potential in terms of like, we've seen Azure Mage before out of control decks. So
that was the card I brought up too. It's been outmoded, whatever. 1U, 1/3, creature, human, wizard. You have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. 3U, draw a card. So Azure Mage was 1U, 2/1 with 3U, draw a card. And that was a fine card for like control mirror-ish sideboards, right? Like you would just bring in this thing that's a little bit of a beater. If you're playing draw go, then you just get to bury them in card advantage. And I like, the 2/1 body is good for that specific reason, but I would argue that, I would much rather have a 1/3 stat line.
Sometimes, for sure. Depends on the format. It's all format contextual. I don't want to go deep into it. I'm not trying to build a deck around this, but cards like this have had uses before. I could see this having a very similar use.
Yeah, like I said, I think Standard has mostly passed that sort of thing by, just like the slow, incremental card advantage type of stuff. But it's there if you want it or need it.
We are depowering. At least it seems that way. So
yeah,
who knows? Who knows if we're shifting back to that?
All right, where do you want to go next? You want to do the staples?
Sure. Yeah, I think the staples are, like we said, one of the odder parts about how you would do this preview season. And they stood out to me as very unique, very interesting.
All right. First card, consider you instant. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard, draw a card. This is basically a better opt.
Yeah.
I don't want to say strictly better because that's not what the word strictly means, but in most instances, it is a better opt.
Yeah, and this is a substantial upgrade. I think it reads much smaller than it actually is, going from Scry to Surveil, basically.
Yep.
That's a push. That's a really hard push, especially for decks that use their graveyard as a resource. They're going to be very happy to see this card. It's pushing into that thought scour territory where just card volume being created starts to be significant, and that stuff matters. It matters a lot, especially in older formats. I'm not sure there's like, I don't know. I think you probably go this before opt in spots you would play opt. I think opt is worse than it has been in the past, but it does still see play and merits consideration. And this is actually furthering my argument that you should just bring Ponder back into Modern, because who cares? There's enough of this type of effect, and the dichotomy between instant and sorcery, like now it's starting to get close enough in these effects where, to be fair, you're probably just playing 8, but I still find it more interesting to have Ponder be a good card in the format than a bunch of other things we've seen in the past. So maybe it's not the right moment given how good the Izzet decks are right now, but still, consider is a really interesting shift, and also just in terms of like how far you're willing to push the 1-mana blue cantrip, because these are a staple of competitive Magic. Go back to Cataxian Probe. You can look at Ponder's relevance in Standard. How good a blue cantrip for 1 mana is often shapes what's possible in the format. And consider from opt is going to change things.
Also think about it in terms of historic, right? Because Brainstorm just left.
Mm-hmm.
I don't foresee a future in which it's coming back.
Neither do I.
And when you're looking at building things like Arclight Phoenix, you have opt, you have Faithless Looting. You really want triple 1-drop on turn 3 to bring back your Phoenixes. And I just wrote an article that had some Phoenix deck lists in it where I was playing things like Crash Through or Warlord's Fury just to have that critical mass of 1-mana things. And now, well, you're just back to having like 12 cantrips that you're very happy to play.
Yeah, Izzet Phoenix has to go right to the top as one of the big winners from this print. It doesn't seem like it's amassing a ton of popularity post Brainstorm ban. At least the very early results are pointing towards people shifting towards Jeskai control in large numbers. The Challenger Gauntlet decks came out today. And
yep, I was going to bring that up too.
Yeah, extremely heavily represented on the Jeskai control side. But I mean, this can be an important card there as well, especially given like just how graveyard centric those decks often are. If you're doing Mizzix Mastery type stuff, you will appreciate these things. You will occasionally hit your card. You will get your Phoenixes into the graveyard. And that's not what you're here for. That's not why you're playing the card. But when it does happen, it's going to be game changing.
Yeah, I mean, if you have anything that is graveyard related, this is such a huge upgrade. Like, even if you're talking about like my control deck plays one Search for Iskanta or whatever, right? Like, this is so much better than Opt. And I'm happy that it exists and they're willing to like push the boundaries a little bit. Like, first, we were living in a world where I didn't think that Opt was ever going to come to standard, right? And then they're like, well, let's try this. And it was good. It was not that bad, you know? And it's like, well, this is a good space for this. Can we push this a little bit more? What would that look like? And then we get to this thing, which is, you know, like half a Thought Scour, but certainly gives you that selection aspect that you really want from your 1-mana cantrips, because there's, you know, like the 1-land Thought Scour hand is pretty risky, right? But like 1-land Opt feels a lot safer. And this is still like juicing your graveyard to the point where, you know, you'd be happier to have this than Thought Scour, even in like a deck with 4 group makers, right?
Yeah. I love that you talked about like assigning power to this card, because we're going to talk more about, again, commons, uncommons, basically at this point, things that look like the foundational cards of this new format we're going to. And we're going to see cards that are having a lot more power assigned to some very specific roles than we usually see. And if that represents a design shift, if you're saying, okay, we can allocate more power into these things, and we're coming down a little bit from the Wilderness Reclamations and the Nissas who shaped the world and putting more points here. Look, Magic is different things to different people. I will tell you, for my money, that is the game I prefer. I prefer the game that's putting more power into these incremental effects, small ball effects, and making them more consistent, giving you more options throughout the game. Consider if it's just step one in a process of allocating more power there, I'm going to be very, very happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just consider. If this was just like a one-off card, then whatever. But there's the other 2 removal spells that we'll get into where it's like there is a clear,
very clear,
shift,
indisputable,
towards,
I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, they're previewing them first, or like, you know, the some of the promos in the set, whatever. And I think that that's awesome. The article that I wrote this week again had some Phoenix deck lists in it, and for some of these deck lists, you just get to a point where, you know, you have 50, 55 cards, and then you hit a wall of, well, these are all the cards that I'm actively happy to like put in my deck, or like happy to draw at, you know, XYZ stage of the game. And then you're like, well, I guess I fill it out with like crash throughs or whatever. And yeah, I don't really like when Magic is like that. You know, I want all the cards to be enticing to some degree, not just like, well, I kind of have to play this, and it's like not very good, but it serves a purpose.
Right.
So this is like, oh, this is exciting, probably partly because of how it compares favorably to the things that we've had in the past, but also just because it is appealing power level wise. Like, Consider is definitely appealing as someone who has cast like Brainstorm, Ponder, Thought Scour, or whatever. I'm like, no, this card is rock solid. I'm happy to have this.
For sure.
Next up, we have Play with Fire. R instant. This deals 2 damage to any target. If a player is dealt damage this way, scry 1. So strictly better shock. I mean, I guess that there's like a way that this could not be strictly better, but it's a better shock.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time coming up with that way.
Maybe there's like no time left in the round or whatever, right?
Or you misplay when you scry, like
yeah, that too.
You put the good card on the bottom. That's about all I have though. So what we're talking about is almost certainly strictly better shock, and that's enough to raise my eyebrows. We had set the baseline for power at shock. This is saying we can allow more. And, you know, there's Wild Slash out there now as the other strictly better shock. That's a Pioneer staple. I think this is better. I can count on one finger, basically, how many times my Wild Slash has mattered. But
unless there are very format specific reasons why you would want the damage prevention thing. Like, I know that Wild Slash was like kind of beating up on Turbo Fog sort of stuff for a bit. True. And the Dromoka's command damage prevention thing has mattered before.
Yep.
But yeah, mostly it was like it's a shock, right? And that's just it. And that's good enough a lot of the time. But again, shock is not a card that I'm excited to draw or have in my deck, because with like creature power creep, there's a lot of toughness going on. And like shock doesn't kill even a lot of the 2-drops anymore, right? So there are just times where it's like, man, I'm playing a deck and it's got shocks, and if I draw 2 of these, it feels like I mulliganed, right? And this alleviates that somewhat.
Let me tell you where I really love this card. I love the scenario where you're down to the late game, and I'm thinking specifically about Mono Red and Pioneer, which I actually played a lot with and against, because when I was teaching Janelle Magic, we played the Pioneer format in her favorite deck until she found Mono Green, Nykthos. She started with Mono Red, though. That's what she loved off the bat. And so, she was very familiar with the wild / shock dichotomy. But one of the situations you're just always in is, okay, I'm going to fire off this burn spell and let's see what happens on the top of my deck.
Right.
And if I hit, good. I love this card in that scenario where not only are you making that gambit, like I have to throw my shocks at your face now and hope to get lucky, but it's helping you get lucky a little bit. I think that's a really cool thing for this card to do. And it's going to feel really nice as the play with Firecaster.
Yeah, it also helps in situations where the red decks go a little bit bigger. They'll have like Hazoret or Chandra, Experimental Frenzy, that sort of thing. Or they're like the Beer G kind of like combo decks in Historic that are very fringe for sure, but like do exist. And this sort of thing like helps you kind of set up for these semi-combo turns, which is kind of cool. It's helpful.
Yes, that stays live. That matters.
Yeah, so this is nice. It's a small upgrade. I don't think it's as big of an upgrade as Considers, but it's definitely solid.
Sure, that tracks.
Infernal Grasp, 1B instant, destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. Is this better or worse, you think, than Heartless Act?
That's so contextual. That's all about the format.
It is, obviously. But
I can't answer that in a vacuum, I don't think. It's more interesting to me as a card. Like, I think what this presents you as a player is way more interesting. Like, you have the option to kill everything. But against the aggressive decks, it's going to be a problem. Like, giving up that 2 life is going to matter a lot of the time. And usually, like, by playing this 2 mana removal spell, what you're getting is some more life. That's the payoff for going low on the removal scale. And now you have to give that up. In some metagames, this is going to be the slam dunk conclusion. No question, this is the way you want to go.
Or in some decks, right? Like if you're mono black aggro, maybe you don't care. Obviously, obviously there's like mono black v mono red type of scenarios where maybe you care a little bit, but for the most part, you're just like, yeah, I just play this because it's not a drawback. Or if you're playing something like Death Shadow or whatever, then it's usually gravy.
Yeah. What do you think about just straight up Death Shadow in Modern? Is this a substantial upgrade for them? I know we want to keep everything to 1 mana, but this is doing 2 things they're very interested in. They want to play that attrition game. They want to control the opposing battlefield and then tack a little bit more life loss onto it. I mean, like, Dismember exists,
yeah,
right?
I was going to say Dismember's better in most scenarios, although there are definitely things like Tarmogoyf from Murktide Regent that get out of Dismember range.
Absolutely. Right? Primeval Titan. Like, I think the reason we've seen Unholy Heat be such an important card is because it does have that 6 damage breakpoint. Like, it's able to clean up those things. And Infernal Grasp still doing that, I think, is very important.
Yeah, I mean, it goes after Planeswalkers too. You also have things like Feed the Swarm if you want that. So
yeah.
Sorcery versus instants, and you don't have as much control over it. You know, like, you know that with this, you're always going to lose 2, but then there might be scenarios where they play a Murktide Regent. You're like, well, I didn't want to lose 7. You know?
Yeah, very true.
So it's interesting. It's definitely a card that people will think about putting in their decks and may show up from time to time. But I don't know. To me, in most instances, I do feel like this is worse than Heartless Act, but it really does depend on the format. You're right about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see what this new format presents us when it comes to its standard play. But I do think this has applications going all the way back for sure.
Yeah, regardless, very appealing text, right? Like 2 mana, just like kill anything. Cool.
Yep, very cool.
The card they started the preview stream with is Join the Dance. This is G-Dub sorcery. Create 2 1/1 white human creature tokens. Flashback 3 G-Dub. And they talked about how they've never done a multicolored flashback card, like a gold flashback card. Like obviously there's Lingering Souls, Desperate Raving, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But they said they were excited to do that because it meant that they could put more powerful designs on flashback cards. And like, this is kind of a medium one, right? But it does make me interested to see what is coming down the pipeline.
Agree. I want to see how they're allocating that power again. I will say, though, using this as like a selling point, the first thing out the gate is a little strange to me because, quite frankly, I didn't realize they hadn't done a flashback multicolored card. And if I didn't realize it, that means I didn't care that much about it. And I hadn't noticed the absence of this thing. And really, if you wanted to hammer home this point, I think you were supposed to show off one of the more powerful cards you made, not necessarily this very foundational thing. But like you said, I'll give them time to see what's coming down the pipeline. I'm just a little thrown off by this particular inclusion.
Yeah, the front side, like 2 mana for 2/1/1s, that has shown up in decks before for sure. This being a sorcery, this being 2 colors, the mana in 2-color aggro decks has not been great.
It has not.
So
this does make humans though, which that's a big deal.
Human does matter. But yeah, there's enough things where I'm just like, well, I'm not super excited about this. But there's obviously going to be human synergies. There may be green-white support, green-white, especially like token-based stuff. They've historically kind of slacked on pushing those sorts of archetypes too. So I'm just like, not super excited about it, but like assuming that sort of thing is good and that is a strategy that you want to be doing, like just giving you a mana sink in the mid to late is really good.
Yeah, no, it's true.
So I could see this actually showing up and feeling powerful, making it so you don't necessarily run out of things to do with your mana. But again, like all of it is contextual, right? And if they had something that was Lingering Souls-esque or whatever that was in your face powerful where you could make that statement and people would be like, oh yeah, this is cool. That does track. I think that would have gone over better, but they also just showed us like, kind of like one of most things going on in the format, right? Like here's a human, here's a zombie, whatever.
Yep. Yeah. That's fair. They could have a lot of purposes in choosing this card. So small gripe with what I think was a very successful preview stream.
You didn't even watch it, man.
Well, I don't care. They showed me the cards I wanted to see. That's what I'm here for. I mean, they can say whatever words they want. As long as the cards are sweet, I'll keep coming back.
All right. Champion of the Perished. Be 1/1 creature zombie. Whenever another zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on this. So, very cleverly named Champion of the Parish for zombies.
This feels like your invitational card.
Yeah, I like my zombies to, be sticky, draw cards, make tokens, whatever. This card is hella good though.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that that's how zombies often operate, like they do go very wide, means that Champion of the Perished is uniquely positioned, I assume. I mean, obviously I haven't seen the zombie cards yet, but I assume it's uniquely positioned to really benefit from those type of zombie synergies where you do make this kind of slow, shambling swarm. And, we saw Diregraph Colossus benefit a lot from that approach to zombies. Champion of the Perished might just be enough to carry an archetype on its own. If there's any reasonable zombie support, which you would expect, given that we're going back to Innistrad, this is a very, very good baseline for that tribal deck to take off.
It would be so disappointing to do this card and then not have zombie support, right?
If you just have any zombies, you're supporting this card, it feels like. It's very hard not to support this card because of how pushed it is.
Yeah, I mean, you need the deck to be able to do stuff. Like this is going to have, casual appeal, maybe some historic appeal. There are a few good zombie cards in Historic Horizons, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like standard is concerned, like those decks have missed a lot, very similarly to like the green-white tokens kind of stuff because it did not have adequate support.
Well, we will see. In any other set, I'd probably agree with you. But come Innistrad, I am confident we're going to see adequate zombie support.
We'll see. I would be happy if I could play something that felt like Amonkhet zombies, right? Mm-hmm. I would be thrilled about that. But
sure,
I'm cautiously optimistic.
Sounds good.
Last card, Wrenn and Seven, 3 GG, 5 starting loyalty, Planeswalker Wrenn, 4 different abilities. +1, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all land cards revealed this way into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So +1 is just cast mulch. 0, put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. -3, create a green Treefolk creature token with reach, and this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. -8, return all permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. You get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size.
A lot of words on this card. Many, many words. I think I like them. I think they're words that please me. I think that as far as 5 mana planeswalkers go, how successful they are depends entirely on the context of the rest of the format. And in almost all cases, like even things like Nissa Who Shakes the World, like that card would have succeeded in most standard formats. But in terms of like raw power, how good is this card going to be historically? How does it compare to everything else that has come before it? I don't think you can know that until you know what really surrounds this planeswalker. I don't expect this is something that like reaches back to older formats. It doesn't have that kind of power read to me right off the bat.
I agree with that.
But in terms of an important standard card, if this -3 does a great job of, defending against Goldspan Dragon, which it seems to do on its face, right? You get your reach creature and it presumably is a 5/5 if you're putting lands onto the battlefield, and it does that defensive thing, and then it charges up your graveyard because there's good graveyard synergies in the set, but it's also putting a bunch of lands into your hand, and then you 0 the next turn, and those flashback cards that you put into your graveyard, you have ample mana for them. This kind of value engine seems extremely promising to me, and the fact that the play patterns are pretty diverse. Like there's a bunch of things this card can do. You can just -3 plus -3 and then have a very big battlefield presence out of nowhere. So I think this card is powerful. I am not willing to declare anything about its format importance, though, until I know the stuff surrounding it. But again, the themes, flashback, incredibly important with a mulch, just having this mid-rangey type engine. If you told me, 6 months from now that a Jund control deck based around Wrenn and Seven is the best thing to be doing, it wouldn't shock me. It seems completely plausible that could be the case.
This card is right up my alley. I like everything that it's doing. I can envision the sort of deck that it would go in. That deck doesn't exist right now. We'll see. I think you bringing up the point of Goldspan Dragon is huge, because if you play this with 5 lands, you get a 5/5 with reach. So you're getting this thing that defends the Planeswalker really well. The Planeswalker is sort of a card draw engine. You're just picking up lands, but it's also making your tree folks bigger, right? And ramping you potentially into something else. There are graveyard synergies, whatever. It's like I see a lot of potential upside, but it's slow. It doesn't have like this huge like mana burst potential of Nissa, for example. So it's very like slow in its scaling. But I think that the initial like you play this, get a 5/5. You also have this Planeswalker. It is really appealing on that turn, right?
Yeah. Let me talk about a play pattern that immediately popped in my head, and it's a weird one. So it wouldn't shock me if it's not something you've really thought about yet. So the type of deck I'm thinking of that will really leverage this harkens back to basically Nissa era stuff, where you're looking at extremely high land counts, 29, sometimes 30. In extreme cases, you can push even further than that. Just high land counts like we've never seen before. And then where you have a play pattern of like +1 Wrenn and Seven on your next turn, +1 Wrenn and Seven again, play another Wrenn and Seven 0. Well, now you've pushed really far ahead. You've juiced your graveyard. So if there are reasonable flashback spells, you just added 5 mana, 4 mana to your battlefield very easily. You still have your Wrenn and Seven in play, still sitting at 5 loyalty. Like you've invested a lot. I'm not saying it's just clean and everything's good.
You spent 10 mana to, put 5 lands into play or whatever.
Yeah, that's a lot for sure. But it also is coming with flexibility. You don't have to do that.
Yeah. Just if it comes up, you have that line of
correct. And that's the type of like mana explosion that is a little terrifying and starts to feel a little bit more like Nissa. And it's not as easy, it's not as clean. And I don't think that's the default mode of Wrenn and Seven. That was just a play pattern that popped in my head that I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you could see this in something that resembled like the Golos Field of the Dead decks, right? Where, like if you had a reason to get up to like 7 or 8 mana, you could just like play this, put 3 lands into play, untap, have a bunch of mana, whatever. Yep. And that seems pretty cool. And yeah, there are a lot of modes. They're all pretty sweet. I remember a match I played at an SCG Invitational that Tom Martell was doing commentary on, and I had a Jace the Mind Sculptor for a few turns, and he was just like, okay, this turn Jerry's going to Fate Seal. Okay, now he's going to unsummon. Okay, this turn he's going to Brainstorm. And it's like the card has so many different modes, and you really get paid off when you're able to leverage every single one of them.
Right.
Compared to like my opponents that I was playing against, who were just like hard slamming the Brainstorm button every turn.
Yep.
And it's like, that's the thing that you can do, right? You can just like play this, make tree folks like beat up people, whatever. But it does have other modes, and being able to utilize those effectively does matter a lot. And these are all things that will pay you off. This is like, all right, I'm going to +1 now because in 3 turns, like this is what I'm going to need or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah, a really interesting card, and one that I'm excited about for sure. So like I said, I think they did a great job with these previewed cards. They basically got me more hyped about Innistrad Midnight Hunt with these 7 cards than like the first 3 weeks of D&D previews did. So,
yeah, you lead with bangers, man. This looks good.
Seems like it.
This looks really good. So this, we could have led with this, I guess. The arena release for Midnight Hunt is September 16th. And then there's also Crimson Vow, which is, this is allegedly a werewolf set. Then Crimson Vow is allegedly a vampire set. And that comes out November 11th. So less than 2 months later. And that means that, we're going to do like top 10 lists into more previews, most likely.
Yeah, it's going to be real close. And, I'm here for it. There is something to preview fatigue, but we've always said like this is our favorite part of what we do, looking at new Magic cards. And especially like after a couple of lackluster preview seasons, it feels really nice to start off on a high note and have cards we're excited about right out the gate. So
we just spent 20 minutes talking about basically 6 cards, and it's because we're all, they're all pretty exciting, right?
Yep.
And
absolutely.
That is awesome. Yep. Trying to cobble together a top 10 list when you can maybe do a top 3 list is not great.
Less awesome.
Yeah, doing the top 5s for Star City, where it's like, number 3 is a bit of a stretch, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I actually submitted 4 cards when I did my second take on the Strixhaven top 5. And I was just like, none of this matters. Like, put whatever cards you want there. None of them actually had any impact. So,
yep. Switching gears, Historic Horizons.
Yeah, good? Let's talk a little bit about Historic Horizons. Like we said, another pleasant surprise. I think set's just interesting enough to have me excited to play with it, and didn't push things too far. I don't feel like I'm being exploited. I feel like I'm going to have the wild cards to actually participate here.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, do you feel like we're being hypocritical by being like, oh yeah, Innistrad is juiced, that's awesome. And then it's like, oh, Historic Horizons was not super juiced, that's awesome.
Context is king. I mean, it just matters like what you're trying to achieve with a format, what else has happened in the format. Like Innistrad being the baseline of new standard has such a weight to bear, especially given the rotation of Eldraine and what Eldraine and the sets that followed it did to the standard format over the last 2 years. So I just think it's a completely different world where we're excited about these cards being powerful, not because they're just like pushed out of their mind. It's because they're powerful in the right ways. And if it was just like, oh, more powerful cards, then I could see your point. But I think there's a little bit more nuance to this argument.
For the record, I don't think we are, but the context matters. And if you listened last week, I mean, we kind of go over why we thought Historic Horizons was, going to potentially be problematic. And a lot of that had to do with the arena economy, really.
Right. Correct.
And so the first batch of cards was appealing. A lot of stuff looked good. There were things that I wanted to try, but then it's just like, I don't have the wild cards for all this, and I don't want to spend like $500 on a format that is only useful if you're like trying to qualify for Pro Tours that don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot that went into it. And then they finished relatively tame, which I was thankful for. And especially since they gave me some common and uncommon stuff where I'm like, oh, this is the stuff that I'm going to be using, not necessarily the rare stuff. So I can spend like a little bit of money, play with some new stuff, try out some new stuff, but just have to commit hard to like, I'm not going to be able to play with everything or have like a full arena account. And that's fine. I just have to make do with it.
Yeah, there is a point that was going to hit, I think, for almost everyone. And if this is the point where I no longer have absolutely everything, I will live with that and build up wildcards for a while and hopefully, find a limited format I can fall in love with and build wildcards that way. And I am also going to take the approach of there's a couple decks I really want to build, a couple decks I want to work on that obviously play well with the cards I already have. So our position is unique in that, right? Like we already basically have full collections. Trying to come at this from day one would be super intimidating, but thankfully we don't have to worry about that. And there's just a few cards I'm going to craft, and then I think I'm off to the races here.
Yeah. So the thing I'm most excited about is Dragon's Rage Channeler and Unholy Heat. This was what my article was about, mostly DRC, but obviously Unholy Heat just goes so well with that card and shows up in all the decks. And I built like Izzet Phoenix and like an Izzet Tempo deck and normal Rakdos, Rakdos Shadow, mono red hollow one, mono red double Phoenix. Like there was basically like no end to places where I thought I could slot those cards into.
I think DRC spawns new archetypes and also fits into all of the best archetypes already.
Yes.
So it's just ready made for the historic format. Do you have any concern about the absence of Mishra's Bauble? Do you think that's going to hold this card back at all? Or can it afford to be held back and still be the most important card in historic?
Yeah, I basically talked about that right from the get because I felt like that was pretty important because it's definitely a large part of why the card is so successful in Modern is because enabling Delirium for it on turn 2 is trivial in most instances.
Yep.
And it's like definitely the sub 10% of the time where on turn 2 you're attacking for 1 and you're just like, what happened? How did I not get there? And a lot of the time it's like, well, I need to descry this land at the top to set up for next turn or whatever, so I couldn't kind of like go ham this turn. But in Historic, it's pretty easy to have instant sorcery creature land in your deck. And there are no fetch lands besides Fable Passage. So just getting like that free land in your graveyard is also difficult.
Yeah.
But I do think that by like turn 3, turn 4, if you have enough ways to trigger its surveil ability, you'll be able to get there. It just means that it won't be online on turn 2 necessarily all the time. And in a lot of instances, there's like some decks that lean like a little heavier on the creature side of things or like a little heavier on the instant sorceries. Yep. And you have to try and balance that number of different card types so that you can actually hit different amounts of things. And to that end, occasionally you'll see things like a random artifact show up in my deck list just to be like a wild card to like fill in for that 4th card type. Like maybe I didn't find instant, but I found my chromatic sphere or something. So I think trying to squeeze in the random card types matters a lot. And there are also some instances where I was playing it alongside like Bomat Courier, Scrap Heap Scrounger, and it was just fine because those are cards that I kind of wanted to play in my deck anyway.
Yeah, that's a great use of card types, I think, and a way to sort of cheat the power level of DRC. Also, it bears mentioning this card can't wait for Consider to arrive. Like it's funny that we're talking about 2 sets of cards that are both not available yet, but they're going to be best friends. And that's probably going to unlock the type of Izzet decks we're seeing have such success in Modern right now. I think that's going to be the thing that translates them to Historic really well.
So the Izzet non-Phoenix deck that I built had 4 heat and 4 opt and was otherwise lacking in cheap cards because I didn't really want to play looting. There's not really another 1 mana blue cantrip and wasn't going to go down the route of like playing value crash through or whatever. And that meant that I couldn't play Dreadhorde Arcanist. And now with this card with Consider, it's like, well, maybe that's back on the menu now.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be a big get for multiple archetypes for sure.
Yeah. So I had like, crash through in my Izzet Phoenix deck again to try and hit like 12 cantrips or like I think 11 cantrips is what I settled on, and was leaning more on the red side of things because you had DRC and then like looting plus whatever red cantrip you're playing. And now it's like, oh, well, maybe we play Consider, we go back to like a 50-50 mana base, and that's probably fine.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm pretty excited for all the cards involved.
What else has you excited in this set? I hit you with a list of some new archetypes that I would love to go through, but I'm curious what else you're doing besides the DRC stuff.
I think Enchantress is worth trying. It might just be like a worse auras, and I haven't actually looked at, like there's no solitary confinement type of things. Like, what are you doing defensively? Pioneer generally has like chain to the rocks type of stuff, or on thin ice in Modern's case, and we don't really have any of that. Like portable holes and artifacts. Baffling End is, it's like you can't just like take a Modern deck, port it to Historic, and add 1 mana to all the cards. It just doesn't
not going to work.
Yeah,
sure.
So it's interesting where like you have some support, but I would have to take a closer look. I think Restoration Angel, the card, is very good. I don't necessarily know what you should be doing with it. But Resto finds a way. Resto is just good enough that it will show up in decks. Even if it's like, well, my Jeskai deck wants a blocker or a clock or whatever. I think that is good enough. I think that Return to the ranks is very good and will likely spawn an archetype. And then I think some of the elf cards are pretty good too.
I agree with you. I talked about elves in kind of my existing archetypes that I think got some substantial bumps because it's out there. I mean, there's been moments of hype for elves in Historic, but new elf planeswalker seems quite strong to me. And some of the arena specific elf cards, there's basically an elf that's like a elvish visionary, except it always draws you an elf.
Which is good and bad.
It can be good and bad for sure, but it's interesting at least. It's enough to have me take another look at the elves available. So I agree with your assessment there.
Oh, some of the goblin cards are really good too.
Yep, that is also very much on my list. Reckless Ringleader, Slinging Lieutenant, and Munitions Expert. You might recognize Slinging Lieutenant and Munitions Expert, but not Reckless Ringleader. That's a 1 red goblin with haste, and when it comes into play, it gives a creature in your hand haste as well. Arena exclusive. I thought that was sort of flying under the radar, but potentially quite interesting. There's some stuff that could go on with that card. So I'm going to keep my eye on that.
Yeah, normally you're trying to set up like War Chief plus Krenko, right? And this can just haste up your Krenko no matter what.
Yeah, cheats a little bit and make sure you always get that Krenko payoff. So I could see that mattering for Goblins, a deck that's kind of been down on its luck a little bit. As far as other new stuff that I'm excited about, some of these I want to talk very little about. Some I want to talk more about. I think Ranger Captain of Eos is a big deal for creature combo. I don't know specifically what creature combo you're looking to do or if there's any great ones at the moment. But at some point, the fact that Ranger Captain of Eos exists is going to enable something kind of degenerate. It's just a matter of time, I think.
Also just a fine value card.
Right. Good point. Yeah. Just completely reasonable at 3 mana. Very meaningful effect on the battlefield. And we mentioned last week too, potential combination alongside Death Shadow. There's good 1 mana creatures in this format, to be sure.
Seasoned Pyromancer is very good too. I think that might be maybe the mythic that gets crafted the most, if I had to guess.
There are, I believe, 2 mythics on my list of cards to craft. 3 mythics. I'm sorry, 3 mythics. And it wouldn't surprise me if Seasoned Pyromancer does eventually end up at the top of those.
Yeah, so that card is solid. Again, it's not like, this spawns like new archetypes by itself necessarily, but just like a good value card and will show up in a lot of spots.
For sure. Other new archetypes I want to explore. Humans. I think Thalia's Lieutenant showing up is a big deal. I think the mana base is basically there to do the multicolor human stuff, and you just have to figure out how you want to put it together, how disruptive you need to be. I don't know if it's all going to work out, but I'm willing to explore it.
Yeah, whether or not you want Luris too is a big one.
Absolutely. Yep. Going to have to answer all those questions. Mentioned Scale Up Dragon combo. This is based on that stupid card. Look, if you can win on turn 2, you better mention it. That is very different from the typical confines of the format. And also we talked about being able to find your like 1 mana card more reliably. This could all matter over time. I'm not saying it's a particularly good deck, but as you add more and more pieces to it, more and more consistency to it, you have to at least consider anything that can kill you on turn 2. Always. This is what I call the Niv Magus Elemental principle.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, so we're going to consider that. I don't think we're going to play it, but we're going to consider it. Soulherder, I think in and of itself is an archetype. It should do something. You're going to have to look at every single possible value creature that exists on the historic format. We added a faux Eternal Witness, which is kind of like often the missing piece. We have Timeless Witness, which is not ideal. I would certainly prefer Eternal Witness. Timeless Witness is the eternalized version of Eternal Witness, but maybe it's enough. Maybe it's enough where you can put together those type of locks that the typical Soulherder decks do use.
It depends. I mean, you like having Ephemerate, you like having like Watcher for Tomorrow type stuff, like just these good value cards that I don't think Historic necessarily has. And then you're also missing like a Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, like cheap removal spell to kind of like buy you some time. But yeah, maybe. I mean, Soulherder Restoration Angel is a good start, but that just kind of speaks to like how much slower the historic version is compared to like modern versions that you might be used to, where it's like, Resto probably makes the cut, right? And it's not even close in modern.
Yeah, missing Ephemerate is tough for sure. Also, anything I say is missing from a format, I'm assuming it's missing. I'm pretty confident in this one, but I certainly get enough historic cards wrong. And I don't want to hear blame from any of you out there because nobody knows all the cards in historic. It's just not possible anymore.
Yeah, I found out that Fanatic Amogus was legal like last week, right? So
there you go. That's another great example. I'm sure there'll be many more throughout your time in the historic queues coming up.
Ephemerate, I feel like I would have known.
I think so.
Wait, is it in the archive?
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. Hold on.
I feel like I would have seen this show up in decks.
It's legal.
Yeah. Okay.
It's legal. Unbelievable.
Right. Okay, so we have one of the pieces. We're still just missing, like a good removal spell, basically.
Well, you learn something new every week on the Arena Decklist podcast. That's why we're here, to make mistakes and learn from them. Ephemerate, historic legal. If
Ephemerate is not showing up, it's a lack of things to blink, right?
Right. Did we cross that bridge here?
Well, no, you have like more Ephemerates in Soulherder and Resto.
Right, but I think Timeless Witness is a big deal. Like, even if that is one more mana, you can now do loops. And that's what was missing before, is you just couldn't loop before.
Yeah, but what are you looping?
Fogs. We'll just fog forever.
Okay, no, that's fine. Sure, do that.
Sometimes.
It's basically Swords to Plowshares, You're just swordsing all their creatures.
Same exact card. Other stuff I am interested in. Emry Artifacts. I don't even know what that deck is. I wrote it down, though, because there is Thought Monitor, there is Emry. There's a bunch of artifacts.
Esper Sentinel, Nettle Cyst. I looked at it too. Like Treasure Vault's a thing. Blackstaff and Waterdeep.
Okay.
You're missing either like the Ensoul type of stuff if you want to go like hard beatdown, or I don't know. You have Chromatic Sphere, which is a decent Mishra's Bauble impression, I guess. But
so there is a weird Ensoul in this set too, right? There's Rise and Shine. Do you know that card?
Yeah, that's true.
That could matter.
It could, but like putting Ensoul on Darksteel Citadel was the joke, right? Like that was.
Hold on. Are you sure Darksteel Citadel is not legal in historic before you go down this road?
I mean, I guess not, but
okay.
I would say no.
I'm gonna Google. I don't think so either, for what it's worth.
I mean, if it is, just Rise and Shine and Blackstaff if you can target lands.
It's not legal in historic.
Yeah, you have Treasure Vault, but like that was kind of the thing where it was just your nut draw, right? Like you make this 5/5 indestructible. A lot of decks can't beat it, even if you're up against a bad matchup. Like maybe this bails you out in some cases. So you're missing a lot of stuff, but I'm sure that you can cobble something together between Esper Sentinel, Thought Monitor, etc.
Mm-hmm. I do find this funny, but this is a real problem. Like us who have played a bunch of historic, who been on Arena since day one and do this for a living, having no idea what is actually playable in the format. I mean, maybe that's just a problem where you're like...
It's not no idea, right? I mean...
We've gotten a few wrong in our days.
Yeah, a few, but you're like, oh, is Darksteel Citadel legal? And it's like, I'm pretty sure, but I know enough to know that I could be wrong. but I'm fairly confident that it's not.
It just seems like that's a tough way to go about things. But I'm also not sure how you alleviate that problem on Arena once you decide to bring new cards into the mix. I guess it's just not fixable. So,
well, right. And then also, 6-9 months from now, you're going to be like, oh, this card. And I'm going to be like, I don't know the name of that card. That doesn't sound familiar. That sounds made up to me. And it is going to be a made up card because it's going to be one of the perpetually whatever cards. And I'm just going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. That card.
Yeah. That'll be a common occurrence, I'm sure. A couple more decks I want to hit on. Shamans. I don't even know what Shamans are legal, but there's Rage Forger and Goblin Anarchomancer alongside Harmonic Prodigy, which may or may not matter. But
I mean, it's really good with Rage Forger regardless.
Right. And if there's other good Shamans, which I haven't done the Scryfall search yet, but I'm going to. So I figured I'd point it out here.
You also have Collected Company, which is a big part of this.
Right. Very cool. Yeah. So there are some pieces there. But here's the one I really want to talk about in terms of new archetypes, because I think I would have banned it already. And I don't even know if it's good, but I'm pretty sure we were supposed to go after Davriel Twin. And if you're not familiar with this, basically it's just taking a Vesperlark. Is that right? Just start with a V?
Yes.
Vesperlark, which is a smaller Revelark, and using one of the cards which gives it perpetual minusing. And when Vesperlark leaves play, you get to return a creature with power 1 or less to the battlefield. Well, if you perpetually minus this stupid card, you get to return it in perpetuity. And then you play it alongside something like Prosperous Innkeeper, Blood Artist. All these things go lethal or infinite life very easily.
So you're saying my return to the ranks deck, instead of playing Luris, could just like backdoor this combo and like
pretty sure
both cards are kind of reasonable.
Yeah, pretty sure. And there's other stuff out there too that like is in these colors that are other infinite combos that all kind of plays together well. There's like the Liliana setup I believe we have access to with the Treasure Goblin. Do you know what combo I'm talking about there?
Any of these combos, I assume that Yeoman5 has posted it on Twitter, and I've looked at it and then just, kept scrolling.
Okay. So
I saw it. I assume it was a post from him, and I don't remember it and don't care to think about it.
This is something that I've actually seen floating in a few places as like maybe a legitimate thing you could do in older formats. Now, I'm not 100% sure that Liliana is actually available on
I don't
Arena.
think it is, but whatever.
Okay. But this combo is available, and there's multiple ways to produce this perpetual effect. There's also the Planeswalker Davriel that you can use to do it. You can use Davriel's removal spell. There's a host of ways to go ahead and find this Vesperlark, be it, Collected Company or whatever else you want to do to reliably find it, or if you just want to bring it back from the graveyard. All of these things seem plausible. So I would not want this anywhere near viable if I were running the historic format. It's going to be miserable in terms of the interface. And quite frankly, it just seems too good. Like, you back all this up with Thoughtseize, and why bother? Just get rid of it. And this points to the reason why we haven't done perpetual minusing before, is it kind of breaks things across zones.
Yeah.
And I think it's very vulnerable to breaking, actually. And it just might be that Vesperlark's the first thing to do it. I don't think it's the last thing to do it.
Yeah, likely. I think that putting the perpetual stuff and Vesperlark in the same set is like, well, you probably missed
asking for trouble.
Well, you probably just missed it, right?
I would assume so, but like, fix it now. What do we have to wait for? Like, we know this is going to be a disaster. There's potentially, if you're building this deck and you're playing for Davriels, which I'm not sure if you should, but say you do determine that's the correct way to build this deck. Now you're 4 mythics deep that maybe don't have a use anywhere else. That's bad. Like, cut that off ahead of time.
Also banned in Brawl, so it's not like you even get your one of there. So.
Right. And so this card has potentially problematic applications, and you took proactive steps in other places to get ahead of it. I would do it in historic too. Whether it's good or not, I don't really care, but I actually think it's going to be pretty good.
It doesn't seem bad as far as like garbage Splinter Twin combos. Like this one does not seem bad because the cards are useful on their own.
Correct.
Maybe the deck that it goes in is like slightly suspect, but it's not more suspect than like the dual Caster Mage and Neoform stuff.
I don't think so at all. I think it's significantly better. And I think there's other shells you could probably splice into this. Like, you could probably do Woe Strider, Bolas's Citadel stuff on top of this too. So now you're branching in a bunch of different directions, and
that sounds good, actually.
Yeah. So now you're basically Hexmage Depths at this point. Like you have two. No, it's the same deck. Exact same deck.
Hey, I'm gonna take some personal offense to that. That's ridiculous.
But you get the point. Like you have two very powerful combo kills in a very not entirely overlapping, but somewhat overlapping shell.
The dream is deck that is good on its own plus has a combo kill. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. For what it's worth, I will say that Perpetual Vesper Lark bring itself back 20 times is probably better than the Tainted Pack stuff for the client side.
Assuming that's what you're doing, but the fact that you're also going to have access to infinite life is what troubles me. Like if you could only kill someone with it, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, I was thinking like Blood Artist more so than Innkeeper.
It's probably going to be both. I think, because Innkeeper's an important part, especially if you are a Bolas's Citadel deck too. Innkeeper's an important part of that.
Yeah, so. I was thinking mostly just in terms of like Cruel Celebrant, Blood Artist, Return to Ranks, and splice this in. I think that is fine.
You could do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, like you're going to get nowhere near infinite life, right? So.
Yep.
Yeah, that's. I mean, eventually you do rope, even if you're still taking game actions. Is that true?
That is true.
Yeah,
that was the problem with Pact, basically.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so you can't gain infinite life. So like that's just like not even good. I mean, maybe you get like 30 or 40 or something, which is annoying. The game's going to go on, but it's not like Book Faceless Haven bad where you just have to play until decking or whatever, right?
I don't know. I honestly don't know how quickly you can do these operations. I don't know what kind of life totals you can reach. If you can do it 150 times in a turn, I think that's really bad.
Yeah.
Like really, really bad.
Yeah, that is bad.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I feel bad like calling for bans before a card's even released, but I just don't see anything good that comes from this combo existing in the format.
Yeah, like I said, I think that this was just an oversight and they can do something about it. That's fine.
Let's hope so.
What else?
Other thing I wanted to talk about was just some other archetypes that got bumped, but we mostly covered that. I think, goblins and elves, two tribal strategies that both do really well. Rakdos Arcanist just picked up a bunch of really useful utility cards in Bone Shards or Unholy Heat, or they can be Dragon's Rage Channeler decks now. So
they're going to be DRC decks.
I agree with you. I think that's a deck that has improved and it's already extremely good. And then there's stuff like Archmage's Charm out there where
we should talk about that one.
Yeah, I absolutely want to talk about that card. My first instinct is like, oh, maybe this energizes Mono Blue Tempo a little bit, which is a fringish type deck, but also you can just rebuild the mana base and make this work in Jeskai, and then that deck is playing some really powerful Magic cards now. And I don't know if it's going to make that move. I'd have to look a little bit more closely at what you're giving up to do it. But this is an important print into the format, I think.
Yeah, very powerful card. You see this show up a lot in Modern, and I didn't necessarily think that maybe you would play like 2 in a deck that could already reasonably cast it. But people are just like, no, I play 4 and I jump through infinite hoops to make my mana work. And I'm like, oh, damn, like you're committed. And the card is very good. Like it is worth doing that a lot of the time. And I was trying to build a deck that could play DRC and it. And it's probably doable, but it's awkward, right? Because you have... you're going to need turn 1 red for DRC and then 3 blue for Archmage's Charm. So you have Steam Vents and Spire Bluff Canal that can do that. Pathway can do that as far as like be either blue or red, but once you play DRC on 1, that means you have a mountain in play effectively. And I think that that's probably fine in most instances. You just have to know what you're getting out of the deal.
Yep.
And I don't think that you can like play 4 DRC and 4 Charm and not have any mountains or whatever. But on the control side of things, I think that it's very easy to just be like, I have 1 plains or 1 mountain.
Yep.
And the rest of my lands make blue. Because you have like irrigated farmland and glacial fortress and stuff like that where, you don't need white untapped on turn 1 necessarily. So it seems a lot more palatable in those decks.
Yeah, I expect this to be an important card for sure. And also like, these mana problems, they're temporary, but the card quality here is forever. And at some point, we will be able to do these things. We will get more lands. We will make it work. Be it, we go back into the vault and Cascade Bluffs shows up eventually, or just future dual lands. Go ahead and fix this.
Dude, those lands are busted.
They are quite good. They're busted in a good way, though. Like they show up every now and then. They enable something which would otherwise be impossible. I appreciate them. And then they go back in the vault and I don't see them for a long time.
Well, they have drawbacks, but they just enable some ridiculous stuff that I don't think should be possible with mana bases,
Okay, there's a downside too, though. I mean, they also cut you off of some very significant stuff when you aren't able to, keep early hands because you're so invested in this particular mana distribution. Like they're only there in small doses. And if you miss, it can be problematic.
I don't know. People didn't play enough Twilight Mires in Jund. That's all I'll say.
Okay, maybe true.
So many games where they're like, swamp, Blackleaf Cliffs, forest with the Scavenging Ooze and can't do anything. And
can't play anything.
Yeah, and Twilight Mire just fixes it all. Just like, okay, your Ooze is a 10-10, let's go, right? People just didn't do it enough because of the fear of what you're talking about, where it's like, well, it doesn't cast Inquisition on turn 1 or whatever. And it's like, whatever. The rest of your lands do that. You can play 2 Twilight Mires and just be fine.
Look, it must be nice to be brave. The rest of us are going to live in perpetual fear and sit here cowering behind our suboptimal mana bases.
Well, you say that it's bravery. I just say that it's doing the correct thing a lot of the time.
Okay.
It's not that hard. Anyway, if you get Cascade Bluffs with Archmage's Charm, whatever. Anything is possible now. Play 3 colors, play 4 colors, play your Charm on turn 3 every game.
We'll see if we ever go down that road. Here's what I want to wrap up with, though. This is something new I tried for this show because I wanted to be proactive. And last week, we spent a lot of time complaining about the potential impact on our wild cards. So I thought, well, the Arena Deckless way used to be, we didn't just complain about the problems, we tried to solve them. And I think the world has done a lot to shatter that viewpoint for us, where we've been faced with a lot of unsolvable problems that just felt like they were outside of our grasps and kind of beat us down a little bit. But I got back on the horse for this one, and I wanted to make a list of basically what I see as the 10 most important cards to craft from this set. So if you're trying to be like, okay, I just want to use this amount of wild cards, nothing else, these are the ones I think you should get right now.
That are mythics and rares.
That are mythics and rares, yes. And that's just based on the assumption that you have enough common and uncommon wild cards. And like we said, very happy to see some very important cards just sitting at the common and uncommon slot, which opens up a lot of stuff for everyone, hopefully.
Yeah, agreed.
So here is my top 10 list. I came up with this list. I think Gerry has mostly co-signed it at this point, but if you want to resist anywhere, feel free to do so, Gerry.
Deal.
Esper Sentinel. And these are in no particular order, by the way. Esper Sentinel, Thought Monitor. We talked about both those cards a little bit. A card we didn't talk about, Nettle Cyst. I think this just goes into existing Aura's decks very cleanly. Any type of like artifacts matters thing that's going to go on. Nettle Cyst, just a good Magic card. Any objection there, Gerry?
I don't object to it being on the list. I think it's very good in the artifact decks. Obviously, it's a little more sketchy in the Aura's deck because if you're just like playing it raw because your creatures are getting killed and you don't have any auras, obviously you could like pants this thing up then and you're getting like double bonuses or whatever. Or if you get to the point where you do have a thing with auras and you can move this around, okay, cool, but maybe that's win more. So I don't know. I'm not really feeling it in the auras deck necessarily, but as the Tarmogoyf sort of thing in the artifact decks, I buy it.
Okay. That's good enough for me. Archmage's Charm. Talked about it.
Hell yeah.
Seasoned Pyromancer. We speculated maybe this will end up being the most crafted mythic. Don't really have a slam dunk home for it, but unquestionably powerful card, right on pace with the rest of the historic format.
The people will find a way to put it in their decks.
I agree with that. Thalia's Lieutenant. I think Humans is unlocked now. It may not quite be there, but like I said, one of the things that really stood out to me with this list is that it didn't feel like there were a lot of must craft mythics and rares. It's just like, okay, this gives me enough value where I'm willing to make this move and try out this Humans deck. So if you've got the other support around it, I think Thalia's Lieutenant's a good craft. Return to the Ranks. You and I both high on this card. It's going to do something absurd. I don't know what. You talked about the Vesper Lark Shell. That's fine. There's other existing stuff you can do with it. It's going to do something.
It's very good.
Ranger Captain of Eos, kind of the same thing. You can play it fair. You can play it dirty, whatever you want to do. Ranger Captain of Eos. Another mythic, but not too many mythics on this list. I believe we are up to 8 thus far. Number 9, Restoration Angel. Like Gerry said, there's just space for this to exist in a lot of archetypes. It might be doing Soulherder stuff where the blink is really important. It might just be a good card in Jeskai control. Both of those seem reasonable to me. And then I'm going to take a flyer here. This is the risky one, but it's possible you'll get this one back if I'm wrong. I think Davriel Soulbroker is the arena exclusive card, especially as far as a mythic goes, that is worth crafting, especially in this Davriel Vesperlark Splinter Twin deck. It seems extremely powerful there. I've spent some time studying the offers and packs or whatever they're called, and I think the power's there. If you hit the right packs, you're going to get huge upside with very little downside. Of course, the randomness is scary, but you're mostly playing this card as a redundant way to do your Splinter Twin stuff and just get some value on the backside. I think this is the card you're safe crafting. Gerry, do you have any thoughts on that?
So in the case of this and some of the other stuff like Ranger Captain of Eos, I would probably take a wait and see approach.
I'm okay with that. Like I said, I stretched for 10, which is a good sign.
I do think that Davriel has a very high ceiling, either in a combo deck that will probably not exist for very long, honestly, if it does show up and is good. But even in something like Rakdos, if for whatever reason you wanted to get away from Lurrus, I did not get away from Lurrus in like any of the lists that I posted this week. But I could see
Seasoned Pyromancer is a good reason to get away from Lurrus too.
Yeah. I mean, there are a few things here and there where now maybe you just have enough reasons to. You know, maybe it's if you had just Seasoned Pyromancer, it's like, well, this probably isn't reason alone. But if it's like Pyromancer plus Davriel, then maybe, you know, or like you want to go up to Chandra or something too. But yeah, this in the Arcanist Shells, I could see being very powerful if you wanted to get away from it. But I'm skeptical that is correct, at least for right now.
We will see, but if you're looking, you're just desperate to burn up those mythics, that's where I would put them for the time being. A couple honorable mentions. I think Sithis, Harvest Hand, like you need some other stuff around that, which is why it didn't make my top 10 if you want to mess around with the Enchantress stuff. And you got to find a payoff, and I'm not really sure it's there yet. Priest of Fellrights was another card that I thought was interesting, and there are some good reanimation targets floating around. So maybe you're just supposed to, cheat your... I'm blanking on the name of the stupid big dragon that's been doing annoying things for a while now. Velomachus Lorehold into play. If that's what you want to do, that seems tenable as well, especially in a format with Faithless Looting. Priest is probably closer to this list than Sithis, Harvest Hand, but a good, reasonable amount of options and a format that I'm looking forward to exploring before it gets ruined by this degenerate combo deck.
So I have the Phoenix stuff and the Rakdos stuff already, so it doesn't really take much for me to update with the new set. So I will definitely play some with that. As far as like making new archetypes, I don't know. I feel like other people are going to do the work on return to ranks type of stuff, and humans I don't believe in. The artifact deck takes a lot of rare wild cards, and again, like that's a thing that I think I would enjoy, but would wait for someone else to do the work.
Okay. Fair enough.
But I'll definitely be playing with Phoenix and Rakdos.
Good. Looking forward to it. I'm sure I will battle you in the queues as we both play obsessively.
Yeah, nonstop. I mean, we're both in bronze, right? So it should be fine.
I might be above bronze.
No, I mean, I was in platinum after the D&D
set. But there was a reset, right? But that was only for Mythic.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, we'll probably end up in the same place, man.
Yeah, we'll be platinum. We'll battle right at our perfect skill level. It'll be great.
Yeah. Game.
Good luck.